Welcome to Sleepwalk Files. Tonight, we are taking a calm, close look at the Montauk Project time travel and mind control theory. Subscribe for daily stories about strange mysteries made to fall asleep to. Imagine standing on the easternmost tip of Long Island, where the Atlantic air is cold and the coastline feels like the edge of the world. You're looking at a massive, rusted radar dish, a relic of the Cold War that looms over the landscape like a sleeping giant. To a tourist, it's just a piece of military history at Camp Hero. But to those who follow the darker currents of American conspiracy, that dish wasn't designed to track Soviet planes. They believe it was a lens, a tool used to focus electromagnetic waves not into the sky, but into the very fabric of our reality. The question that has haunted researchers and forum dwellers for decades is simple, yet terrifying. Was this secret military facility used to tear holes in time and space? The central claim of the Montauk Project isn't just about time travel in the way we see it in movies. It's something far more invasive. The theory suggests that Camp Hero was a laboratory for psychotronics, a field of study where the boundary between the human mind and physical matter completely disappears. We aren't talking about simple telepathy or remote viewing. We are talking about the allegation that the government discovered a way to use the human subconscious as a projector. Think about that for a moment. The idea that if you could amplify a person's psychic energy using high-frequency electromagnetic waves, you could literally manifest physical objects out of thin air, or worse, people. According to the law, the researchers at Montauk weren't just observing other timelines, they were pulling things from them. There are accounts of time tunnels being opened, where the past and the future leaked into the present. Imagine a soldier from the Civil War suddenly appearing in a sterile, concrete hallway in the 1970s, or a piece of technology from a century in the future manifesting on a laboratory table, only to vanish when the power flickered. This wasn't supposed to be a public project. It was a black operation, hidden in plain sight under the guise of a standard Air Force station. The claim is that while the world was worried about nuclear war, a small group of scientists and psychics were playing with the fundamental laws of existence. They weren't just trying to move through time, they were trying to rewrite it. The details that make this story spread aren't just the grand claims of portals, but the chilling methods used to achieve them. The theory suggests the use of specialized chairs and psychological conditioning designed to break a human being's grip on their own identity. The goal was to turn the human mind into a biological antenna, capable of tuning into frequencies that the rest of us can't even perceive. If you believe the reports, the government found a way to bridge the gap between thought and matter. They claimed that the mind doesn't just perceive reality, it creates it. And if you can control the mind, you can control the physical world. You could bring back a lost loved one, or summon a weapon from a future war. But as anyone who has looked into the Montauk files knows, when you open a door to another dimension, you have no way of knowing what might decide to walk through that door from the other side. Why does this particular story stick with us? Maybe it's because it touches on our deepest fear, that our memories are not our own, and that the world we see around us is just a thin veil draped over something much more chaotic. The Montauk Project suggests that the government didn't just experiment on people. They experimented on time itself, leaving behind fractures in reality that might still be open today. As we look closer at the facility, the physical evidence begins to mirror the madness of the theory. The radar dish is only the beginning. To understand how a place like this could actually function, we have to go deeper. We have to look at what lies beneath the soil of Long Island, in the dark, silent corridors where the light of the sun never reaches. If you stand at the edge of Camp Hero today, the first thing that hits you isn't the wind or the smell of the salt air. It's the scale of the radar dish. It looms over the landscape like a giant, blind eye, staring up at a sky it was never meant to see. Officially, this was the Montauk Air Force Station, a Cold War listening post designed to detect incoming Soviet bombers. But for those who study the Montauk Project, the dish is just a distraction, a piece of theater. They argue that a radar array of this size doesn't just listen for planes, it transmits. And it doesn't transmit signals into the air, but deep into the earth. The central question that haunts every urban explorer and conspiracy researcher who visits the site is simple. Why is there so much concrete? When you walk the grounds, you notice that the surface structures are strangely sparse compared to the sheer amount of reinforced masonry and heavy-duty cabling buried in the soil. The theory suggests that the real Camp Hero isn't a base at all, but a vertical city. We're talking about a rumored subterranean complex consisting of multiple levels, stretching far deeper than any standard Air Force installation would ever require. Why would a radar station need bunkers capable of withstanding a direct nuclear hit, or ventilation systems that seem designed to scrub the air of something far more toxic than smoke? Locals have spoken for decades about the oppressive atmosphere of the facility. They describe it as a heavy, psychic weight that settles on your chest the moment you cross the perimeter. There are reports of dead zones, specific patches of land where electronics fail, where watches stop ticking, and where the silence feels artificial, as if the sound is being sucked out of the environment by some unseen vacuum. If the government was using the site for psychotronics, these dead zones wouldn't be accidents. They'd be the footprints of electromagnetic experiments that warped the local environment, leaving behind scars in the physical world. Think about the logistics of the claim. To tear a hole in time, or to manifest an object from another dimension, you would need an immense amount of power. You would need a way to focus that energy into a single, pinpoint location without vaporizing the operators. This is where the subterranean bunkers come in. The theory posits that the underground levels acted as a massive amplifier, using the natural geology of Long Island to bounce frequencies back and forth, creating a resonance chamber for the human mind. The radar dish above was merely the antenna, the lightning rod that grounded the energy or beamed it toward a specific coordinate in the future. There are accounts from former workers and trespassers who claim to have found access points to these lower levels, heavy steel doors hidden behind fake walls, or elevators that descend far past the basement. They describe corridors that feel endless, lined with lead shielding to protect the staff from the radiation of the experiments. The sheer volume of concrete poured into the Montauk cliffs suggests a project of an ambition that dwarfs the Cold War's need for early warning systems. You don't build a fortress in the dirt just to listen for bombers. You build it to contain something. The mystery deepens when you look at the maps. Public records of the base are frustratingly vague, often omitting the exact layout of the underground utilities. When researchers compare the official blueprints to the physical reality of the site, the math doesn't add up. There are gaps in the geography, spaces that exist in the physical world but are absent from the paperwork. These architectural ghosts are what drive the belief that Camp Hero was a laboratory for the impossible. It wasn't just a base, it was a machine. And the most terrifying part of that machine wasn't the electronics, but the fact that it was designed to be operated by people whose minds were being pushed to the breaking point. To understand how they managed this, we have to look at the man who claims he was one of them. How does a man wake up and realize his entire life is a lie, only to discover that the truth is far more terrifying than the fiction he was living? This is the central riddle of Preston Nichols. For years, Nichols lived as an ordinary citizen, unaware of any connection to the desolate cliffs of Long Island. But in the late 80s, he claims a dormant part of his mind began to stir. He didn't just remember a job, he remembered a second life. He described a psychic awakening, a series of flashes and fragments that suggested he had been a key operative in a project so secret that the government had surgically removed the memory of it from his brain. According to Nichols, he wasn't just an employee at Camp Hero. He was a victim of its primary goal. He alleged that the facility specialized in the erasure and implantation of memories, creating a workforce of sleeper agents who could perform high-level psychic tasks without ever knowing who they were or who they worked for. Imagine the psychological horror of that realization. The feeling that your childhood, your career, and your very identity were merely a cover story, a thin veil draped over a history of government servitude. Nichols claimed he had been conditioned to forget, but that the mental blocks had begun to crack, leaking images of sterile white halls and the humming of high-voltage machinery. The centerpiece of these recovered memories is something Nichols called the Montauk chair. He didn't describe it as a piece of furniture, but as a sophisticated interface. According to his testimony, the chair was designed to amplify the psychic energy of the person sitting in it, focusing their thoughts into a coherent beam. By syncing the human mind with the electromagnetic frequencies of the radar dish above, the chair supposedly allowed a psychic to project their consciousness across time and space. Nichols claimed that if the operator focused hard enough on a specific moment in the past or a coordinate in the future, the chair would create a bridge. It wasn't just a vision, it was a doorway. But the process wasn't clean. Nichols spoke of the intense psychological toll this took on the staff. He described a culture of extreme conditioning, where researchers were kept in a state of perpetual disorientation to make them more susceptible to psychic influence. He alleged that the project used a combination of sensory deprivation, chemical agents, and electromagnetic pulses to break down the ego. In Nichols' version of events, the government wasn't just studying time travel. They were studying how to dismantle the human soul to make it a more efficient tool for the state. When Nichols finally came forward in the early 90s, he didn't just offer anecdotes. He claimed to have evidence of the project's existence, detailing the specific technical jargon and the names of the departments involved. He spoke of psychotronics, a field of study that blended electronics with the untapped power of the human mind. He described a world where thought could be weaponized, where a person could be manipulated into seeing things that weren't there, or worse, where things that shouldn't exist could be pulled into our reality through sheer force of will. The most unsettling part of Nichols' claim is the idea of the reluctant participant. He didn't describe himself as a willing scientist, but as a man who had been trapped in a cycle of memory loss and rediscovery. He suggested that the project had its own internal logic of betrayal, where staff members were regularly reset to ensure no one ever left the facility with the full picture. It creates a picture of a laboratory that was as much a prison as it was a research center, where the researchers were just as much the test subjects as the people they were experimenting on. Of course, these claims are staggering. To believe Preston Nichols is to believe that the US government mastered the fabric of time and space in a bunker on Long Island and then simply decided to hide it. But for those who have followed the trail of the Montauk Project, Nichols isn't just a storyteller. He is the primary witness to a hidden history, a man who claims to have seen the abyss and returned with a map of the tunnels. The question remains, was he remembering a secret life, or was he the architect of a modern myth? To answer that, we have to look at what Nichols claims happened when the experiments actually worked. If you can move a mountain with your mind, can you accidentally create a monster? This is the question that haunts the most disturbing chapter of the Montauk claims. We aren't talking about a biological creature grown in a petri dish or a genetically modified animal. We are talking about a manifestation. The theory suggests that the researchers at Camp Hero discovered something terrifying, that the human subconscious doesn't just perceive reality, it can actually project it. According to the accounts surrounding the project, There was a specific event involving a psychic researcher who was using the Montauk chair to push the boundaries of materialization. The goal was simple, or so they thought. They wanted to prove that a focused human mind, amplified by the facility's massive electromagnetic arrays, could pull a physical object out of thin air. But the human mind is a messy place. It's filled with repressed fears, nightmares, and images we can't quite shake. The allegation is that during one of these sessions, the researcher lost control. Instead of manifesting a simple object, they tapped into a deep, primal fear. They didn't just think of a monster, they felt it. And in that moment of psychic instability, the theory claims a creature began to bleed into our world. Witnesses described it as a hybrid, a distorted thing that didn't belong in any known biological category. It wasn't born, it was thought into existence. Imagine the scene in those subterranean halls. The alarms screaming, the humming of the machinery reaching a fever pitch, and suddenly there is something in the room with them that shouldn't exist. This wasn't a ghost or a hallucination. The claim is that this thing had mass. It had a physical presence. It was a living nightmare made of flesh and thought, a biological glitch caused by a tear in the fabric of space-time. The chaos that followed is where the story turns from a scientific experiment into a horror movie. The staff didn't have a protocol for a manifested monster. They couldn't just shoot it, because how do you kill something that is essentially a physical projection of a human thought? The theory suggests the creature was erratic and violent, reacting to the emotional states of the people around it. It was a mirror of their own panic. The only solution, according to the rumors, was a desperate attempt at collective mental discipline. The researchers had to try and unthink the creature. They had to coordinate their minds to visualize the monster dissolving, to push it back into the void from which it had been summoned. It was a battle of wills fought in a concrete bunker, where the weapon was sheer concentration. They had to convince the universe that the creature wasn't real, even as it was tearing through the facility. This specific detail, the idea of the Montauk Monster, is why the story persists in online forums and conspiracy circles today. It moves the conversation away from simple time travel and into the realm of thought forms. It suggests that the government wasn't just playing with clocks and calendars, but with the very essence of consciousness. If the mind can create matter, then the boundary between the internal world of our dreams and the external world of stone and steel is a lie. Of course, there are no photographs of this creature. There are no official military reports describing a psychic beast in a Long Island bunker. All we have are the testimonies and the chilling internal logic of the theory. But for those who believe, the monster is the ultimate proof of the project's danger. It serves as a warning that when you open a door to another dimension, you aren't just letting things out. You're letting the darkness inside your own head take a physical shape. It makes you wonder, if such a thing is possible, what else has been manifested in those tunnels, and did they really manage to unthink all of it? Could the nightmares of Montauk be the logical conclusion of a much older, documented history of madness? When we look at the claims of time portals and psychic monsters, it's easy to dismiss them as pure fantasy. But if you step back and look at the timeline of American intelligence from the 50s through the 80s, a darker pattern emerges. The theory suggests that the Montauk Project wasn't a random experiment, but the hidden successor to a lineage of government programs designed to break the human mind. To understand this, we have to look at MKUltra. That wasn't a theory. It was a verified CIA program that ran for 20 years. We have the records. We know about the use of LSD, sensory deprivation, and psychological torture used on unwitting subjects in safe houses across the country. The goal of MKUltra was simple and terrifying: total mental control. They wanted to find a way to wipe a person's personality and rewrite it, creating a sleeper agent or a perfect interrogator. But MKUltra was just the beginning. There were other fragments, like Project Chatter, which focused on the use of drugs to induce a state of hypnotic suggestibility. The dark lineage theory claims that once the CIA and the military realized that chemicals had limits, they shifted their focus. They moved from pharmacology to physics. This is where the bridge to Montauk is built. The allegation is that the government transitioned from using drugs to control the mind to using electromagnetic frequencies. If you can influence the brain with a chemical, why not influence it with a wave? Think about the jump in technology between 1953 and 1973. By the time the rumored activities at Camp Hero were in full swing, the military had access to massive radar arrays and advanced electronics. The theory suggests that the psychotronics Preston Nichols described, the ability to project thoughts or manifest objects, was simply MKUltra 2. Instead of an LSD drip, they used high-frequency electromagnetic fields to stimulate the subconscious. They weren't just trying to control a soldier anymore. They were trying to weaponize the human imagination. There is a chilling internal logic to this progression. In the early days of MKUltra, the goal was to erase a memory. In the Montauk claims, the goal was to erase the boundary between the mind and the physical world. It's a straight line from the documented horrors of the 50s to the alleged anomalies of the 70s. If the government was willing to kidnap citizens and poison them in the name of national security during the Cold War, why is it so hard to believe they would push those experiments into the realm of the paranormal? Some researchers point to the overlap in personnel and methodology. The same obsession with remote viewing and psychic warfare that fueled the Stargate Project, another verified government program, is mirrored in the stories coming out of Montauk. The government spent millions of dollars trying to see if a human being could perceive a target thousands of miles away using only their mind. If they believed in remote viewing, the leap to remote manifestation isn't as far as it seems. It's just the next step in the evolution of a weapon. This is why the story of Montauk feels so heavy. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. It hitches a ride on the very real trauma of the 20th century. When people hear about the Montauk chair and the psychological conditioning of the staff, they aren't just hearing a ghost story. They're hearing an echo of the real-world screams from the MKUltra labs. The theory posits that Camp Hero was the place where the government finally stopped asking if they could break the laws of nature and started asking how they could use those broken laws to win a war. It suggests that the monster in the bunker wasn't the only thing created there. The real monster was the system that decided the human mind was just another piece of hardware to be hacked. If the Montauk chair actually worked, we have to ask a question that is far more unsettling than whether the government can build a time machine. We have to ask what happened to the world we're living in right now. Because according to the theory, you don't just move a person from point A to point B in time. You don't just slide a physical body across a calendar, you tear a hole. The claim is that the experiments at Camp Hero didn't just observe the past or future, but actually fractured the local timeline. Imagine the fabric of reality as a piece of heavy silk. If you poke a needle through it, you leave a hole. But if you rip it, the edges don't always line up when you try to sew them back together. This has led to the theory of time slips. People who visit the eastern tip of Long Island often talk about a strange, oppressive feeling, a sense that they are standing in a place where the air feels thick or wrong. Some theorists suggest these aren't just psychological reactions to a creepy abandoned base, but actual geographic scars. There are stories floating around internet forums and local lore about people experiencing brief, jarring displacements. A hiker sees a car from the 1950s driving down a road where no cars are present, only for it to vanish in a blink. Or a visitor finds themselves in a version of Montauk that looks slightly different. Perhaps a building is missing, or the shoreline has shifted, before suddenly snapping back to the present. The theory suggests that the government didn't just travel through time, they accidentally created parallel versions of Long Island. This leads to the most haunting part of the claim, the idea of being out of sync. If the Montauk Project succeeded in blurring the lines between dimensions, it implies that some people might have been shifted into a neighboring reality without ever knowing it. You wake up, your coffee tastes the same, your house looks the same, but you are no longer in the original timeline. You're in a copy, a slightly skewed version of the world where something fundamental has changed, but you're the only one who remembers how it used to be. Think about the sheer scale of that mistake. If the researchers at Camp Hero were pushing the Montauk chair to its limits, they weren't just risking their own lives, they were risking the integrity of the region. Some believe the dead zones reported around the facility are actually places where the timeline has completely collapsed, leaving behind a vacuum where time doesn't move linearly. It's why the atmosphere there feels so heavy. You aren't just feeling the history of a military base. You're feeling the friction of two different realities rubbing against each other. And then there's the question of the echoes. If a psychic researcher manifested a monster or a city from another era, did those things truly vanish when the experiment ended? Or did they simply migrate? The theory posits that the fractures created at Montauk acted as open doors. Once you open a door to a parallel dimension, you can't be entirely sure who or what walked through before you slammed it shut. This is why the story bothers people on a deeper level than a simple government cover-up. It suggests that our current reality is fragile. It proposes that the world we see is just one of many overlapping layers, and that a group of men in a bunker on Long Island might have accidentally shifted us all into a sidetracked timeline decades ago. We aren't living in the original world. We're living in the aftermath of a psychic accident. And the most terrifying part, if the fabric of time was ripped once, there is nothing stopping it from happening again. We're just waiting for the next slip. But if we step back from the edge of the portal for a moment, we have to ask a very uncomfortable question. Is the entire legend of the Montauk Project simply a masterclass in science fiction, masquerading as a memoir? Because when you look for the foundation of this story, you don't find classified dossiers or leaked memos. You find a book. In 1992, a man named Preston Nichols published The Montauk Project, Experiments in Time, co-authored with Peter Moon. This is where the world first heard about the Montauk chair and the manifestation of monsters. For the skeptics, this isn't a whistleblower's account, it's the origin point of a myth. They argue that Nichols didn't recover lost memories of a government conspiracy, but rather constructed a narrative that blended urban legends with the pulp fiction of the era. Think about the timing. The early 90s were a golden age for conspiracy culture. People were already reeling from the verified horrors of MKUltra and the general distrust of the military-industrial complex. Nichols provided a story that fit perfectly into that mood. He gave us a villain, a secret location, and a level of cosmic horror that felt plausible because it was anchored to a real place, Camp Hero. The skeptics point to a psychological phenomenon called false memory syndrome. It's a documented occurrence where a person can become absolutely convinced of an event that never happened, often through the process of suggestive questioning or intense imagination. In this view, Nichols wasn't a victim of government memory erasure. He was a victim of his own mind, or perhaps a very creative storyteller who began to believe his own fiction. If you look at the official records of the Montauk Air Force Station, the story changes completely. The government maintains that Camp Hero was exactly what it looked like, a radar station designed to detect incoming Soviet bombers during the Cold War. The massive dish wasn't a psychic amplifier, it was a piece of surveillance technology. The tunnels weren't laboratories for time travel. They were reinforced bunkers meant to protect personnel from a nuclear strike. It's a dry, bureaucratic explanation, but it's the only one supported by paperwork. There is no official record of a Montauk Project. No budget lines, no payroll for psychic researchers, no procurement orders for the materials needed to build a time machine. To a historian, the silence is deafening. If a project of this scale existed, one that could rip holes in reality, the footprint it left behind would be massive. You can't move that much equipment and employ that many people without leaving a paper trail, even in the world of black ops. Then there's the internal logic of the claims. Nichols described a world where thought could create matter, where the mind was the ultimate weapon. While that makes for a gripping story, it defies every known law of physics. Skeptics argue that the evidence provided by Nichols, his personal recollections, is the weakest form of proof possible. He asked the world to believe him simply because he remembered it, even though he admitted his memories had been suppressed for years. So if the books are just fiction, why does the story feel so real? Why do people still visit the coast of Long Island and feel that oppressive weight in the air? The skeptical answer is that the location itself does the heavy lifting. Camp Hero is a haunting place. It's a concrete skeleton of the Cold War, sitting on a lonely cliff overlooking a grey ocean. It has the look and feel of a place where something terrible happened, regardless of whether that something was a time portal or just the crushing boredom and paranoia of soldiers staring at a radar screen for 12 hours a day. In this light, the Montauk Project isn't a hidden history of the government. It's a modern folklore. It's a story we tell ourselves to make sense of the gaps in our knowledge and the fear we have of what the state might be capable of in the dark. But even as the skeptics dismantle the evidence, one question remains. If it was all just a story from a 1992 paperback, why does the legend only seem to grow stronger with time? If the Montauk Project was truly just a fabrication of a few paperback books from the 90s, why does the legend refuse to die? Why does it feel as though the story is actually growing, evolving, and embedding itself deeper into our collective subconscious? There is something about the imagery of Camp Hero that acts like a magnet for the unexplained. It's the lonely, rusted silhouette of that massive radar dish against a grey Long Island sky. It's the way the fog rolls in off the Atlantic, swallowing the concrete ruins of a Cold War relic. It's a landscape that practically begs for a secret. In recent years, the Montauk myth has migrated from the fringes of conspiracy bookstores into the center of global pop culture. You can see the DNA of the project all over the series Stranger Things. The missing children, the government labs, the psychic girls, and the rift into an alternate dimension. It's almost a beat-for-beat echo of the claims made by Preston Nichols. But when a story moves from a conspiracy theory to a hit television show, something strange happens. The line between the fiction and the allegation begins to blur. For a new generation, the Montauk Project isn't just a rumor from a 1992 memoir. It's a vibe, an aesthetic of government dread that feels intuitively true. This digital afterlife has breathed new life into the original theories. On forums and deep web threads, people still discuss the Montauk chair, not as a plot point, but as a possibility. There are communities of people who believe that the research into electromagnetism and mind control never actually stopped, but simply moved deeper underground or shifted to different coordinates. They point to the documented horrors of MKUltra as the proof of concept, arguing that if the government was willing to dose its own citizens with LSD to break their minds, why wouldn't they try to break time itself? Then there are the modern explorers. People use apps like Randonautica to seek out quantum anomalies, often finding themselves drawn to the coordinates of Camp Hero. They report a lingering heaviness in the air, a sense of being watched, or the feeling that they are stepping into a place where the laws of physics are slightly skewed. Is it just the atmospheric weight of a military installation, Or is it the residue of something Nichols described? The idea that a time slip could leave a permanent scar on a piece of land is a terrifying thought, but it's one that keeps people returning to those cliffs. Even the documentary evidence, like Christopher Garetano's Montauk Chronicles, keeps the fire burning by focusing on the gaps in the official record. The government says the base was a standard radar station, but the layout of the facility, the sheer scale of the subterranean bunkers, continues to strike people as overkill for a simple listening post. Why build a fortress that looks like it could survive a nuclear winter just to track Soviet planes? That architectural discrepancy provides the oxygen the theory needs to survive. Ultimately, the Montauk Project persists because it represents our deepest fear of the state. The idea that there is a level of secrecy so profound that it doesn't just hide documents, but hides entire realities. It suggests that the world we see is just a thin veil, and that somewhere in a concrete room in New York, someone once found the switch to turn that veil off. Whether it was a genuine breach in space-time or the most successful piece of accidental folklore in American history, the legend of Camp Hero remains an open wound. We keep talking about it because we want to believe that the universe is stranger than we're told. We want to believe that the ghosts of the Cold War aren't just memories, but echoes of a project that succeeded in ways we can't even imagine. As long as that radar dish stands silent on the coast, watching the horizon, we will keep wondering what it was actually looking for, and more importantly, what it might have let in. But if you dig deeper into the forums where the true believers gather, the story doesn't end with a closed base and a few books. There is a persistent claim that the project never actually stopped, but simply migrated. Some theorists point to the targeted individual community, where people describe being subjected to high-tech harassment and voice-to-skull transmissions. They argue that the psychotronic research pioneered at Camp Hero wasn't dismantled, but refined and deployed on a mass scale. In this version of the story, the Montauk chair wasn't a prototype for a time machine, but the blueprint for a global system of electromagnetic surveillance and mind control. Then there are the physical anomalies that people still report today. Some visitors to the Camp Hero site claim to have found strange metallic debris in the wooded areas surrounding the radar dish, fragments that don't match any known aircraft or military hardware of the era. There are whispers of black-budget documents that surfaced in the late 90s, allegedly mentioning a project called Project Chatter, a verified CIA effort to use drugs to create a Manchurian candidate. The theory is that Montauk was the final, most extreme evolution of Chatter, moving from chemicals to pure energy. Some researchers focus on the dates. They note a strange spike in reported glitches in the Matrix and time-slip sightings across Long Island during the early 80s, coinciding exactly with the window Nichols claimed the project was at its peak. They ask why certain local records from that era are inexplicably missing or redacted, and why the land was kept under such tight military lockdown long after its strategic value as a radar site had vanished. Could it be that the government didn't just build a base, but accidentally opened a door that cannot be closed? Some believe the Montauk Monster wasn't a one-time mistake, but a sign that the barrier between our world and another has become porous. They suggest that the heaviness people feel at the site is actually a localized distortion in gravity, a permanent scar left by the sheer amount of energy pumped into the Earth. It leads to a chilling conclusion that we aren't just remembering a secret project, but living in the aftermath of a cosmic accident. The radar dish isn't just a relic of the Cold War. It's a monument to the moment we tried to play God with the clock and the terrifying possibility that we actually succeeded. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to Sleepwalk Files to stay up to date with new mysteries and long videos to fall asleep to every night.